Live with CDP Sports Talk, a weekly sports and entertainment podcast sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet. Live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And on audio via Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Radio Public, and TuneIn. Now, here's your host, Chris Palme.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of Live with CDP Sports Talks this evening, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet, 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210. Tell them Chris Palma, aka CDP, sent you there as well. Or you guys can now email them at info@barrycullen.com. And also, guys, you can pre-order now your all-electric Silverado or your all-electric Cadillac Lyriq. And also check out the Chevy Trailblazer, as I just purchased a 2023 Chevy Trailblazer RS model from Nathan Laud at Barry Cullen Chevrolet as well. So again, thank you everybody for coming back on my podcast show for tonight, part 2, season 5, episode 24 here on this Monday, February 6, 2023, Super Bowl week now, thankfully. Did not like having no football yesterday as well. But guys, I'm looking forward to my guest tonight, Greg Vorse. He's an award-winning sports anchor reporter from Buffalo, New York, and formerly with Spectrum News. And he's also a communications expert, social media and digital content specialist. And he also used to cover the Erie Otters of the OHL. So maybe we'll talk to him a little bit about the Ontario Hockey League and his experience with the Erie Otters. Good afternoon, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate that intro. I think you crammed in about 20 years of broadcasting into a couple sentences.
Well, thank you. I've only been doing this podcast show since March 2020 when the pandemic struck, and this is my 244th episode. And my goal is to get into radio, and I've been very lucky to have such great guests come on my show over the years.
Well, I'll try not to bring it down too far.
You're fine. You're a Michigan fan, man.
Go Blue.
Go Blue. Hey, before we get into questions, what were your thoughts on the 2022 Michigan Wolverines and their loss in the playoffs to TCU?
Well, anytime you beat Ohio State, I'm already happy. It's one of those things where, if you go 1-12, but the 1 is a win against the Buckeyes, it's still a year to celebrate. A second Big Ten championship, obviously another reason to celebrate. And the biggest frustrating thing with the loss to TCU was for a quarter and a half, for whatever reason, Jim Harbaugh and company decided to go against what had gotten them to that point, that ground and pound, the offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award. And then they decided to get tricky and do, the Philly special. I know you mentioned you're an Eagles fan, so the Philly special, they tried to pull that out with J.J. McCarthy running around like a chicken with his head cut off, and Colston Loveland, the tight end, not being able to throw the ball. And it just seemed like it was downhill from there. And it took them too long to realize, maybe Bo Schembechler was right back in the 80s, that 3 yards in a cloud of dust isn't the worst way to go about their business. But I'm happy that those 2 wins, the Big Penn State win, a Michigan State win, Ohio State win, getting a Big Ten championship. And I'll be honest, if they don't make it one more step this year, then I'll start to get upset.
I was going to ask you, what are your expectations for this team going forward? Do you think Michigan can be even a better football team next year going into 2023?
Having another year under J.J. McCarthy's belt obviously can't hurt. Having Blake Corum come back and some of the NIL money that's now coming in is obviously not going to hurt. I was surprised with how many guys decided to come back. That offense should be fantastic. The line should be loaded. Will Johnson, the 5-star corner from last year, has All-American potential. I mean, he has NFL draft top 10 pick potential. Now he's a sophomore, and really Harbaugh did a fantastic job, and his staff did a great job, not necessarily in recruiting because they finished 18th, 16th, 17th, depending on what recruiting rankings you look at, but they own the NIL. They went and pick and plugged some 3, 4, 5-star guys that already have big time experience to fill some of those holes. So honestly, I hate having this level of expectations, the boom or bust, the championship or bust expectations. But if nobody gets hurt, nothing stupid happens, there's no reason they're not back in the CFP and hopefully taking another step and finally hoisting that trophy. And I can once again rub it in on my Buckeye friends' faces for a third straight season.
Yeah, definitely. Beating Ohio State is the equivalent of the Eagles beating the Dallas Cowboys. Anytime you beat Ohio State or the Dallas Cowboys, it's a good day. But one thing I was going to say too is how Michigan built their team is like how the Eagles did it. The Eagles did theirs with the O-line and the D-line, and then they added pieces, obviously the quarterback and the receivers and stuff like that. But to me, I'm old school football. I still believe in a good offensive line and a strong defensive line.
Well, Howie Roseman has been a magician, the way he's worked his draft capital, draft picks, trades. He's done some amazing things to my east over there in Philly.
And before we get to the Bills and your career, Greg, thoughts on the earthquake in the Buffalo area this morning? And did you know of any damage to anybody's houses in that area?
No, honestly, from everything I've gathered from people I've seen with their Ring video doorbell, videos and different nanny cams and things like that, there wasn't a ton of damage. It was more spooking. We often joke here in Buffalo that we'll deal with the blizzards and snowstorms because we don't have to deal with hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes. And then this morning, Mother Nature was like, yeah, not, steal a line from Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend, and showed us that maybe global warming is a thing we should pay attention to a little more here as Americans and as citizens of this great world.
Absolutely. And you guys have also had to deal with a ton of snow. In November, you got hit. And then just before Christmas, 7 feet of snow. So it's just been crazy weather-wise in Buffalo the last couple of months with snow and blizzard. And then apparently this blizzard was worse than the one in 77.
Yeah, I joked with some of my friends today that we had our 49th generational storm hit us with this earthquake today. It's been one thing after another. This city, it really is a city of amazing people, but it's been through enough. I'm ready to, I'm a UFC mixed martial arts fan. I'm ready to tap out. Let's go on to spring and move on beyond this.
Speaking of that, how is the overall mood of Buffalo right now with the Buffalo Bills after their disappointing playoff loss to the Bengals 27? I think it was 27-10.
Correct. The overwhelming shock of it has waned. The instant irritation of that loss has started to wane, and people, have healed a little bit. Again, when I mentioned at the beginning, it's hard to have that boom championship or bust mentality. And a lot of people around here, the expectation was the Bills' first ever Super Bowl championship, and scheduling a parade from 8 days from where we currently are taping. And when you have that, nothing else is going to satisfy it unless you get that championship. So when you fall short, on a season when you were 13-3 and just about every metric, point differential, DVOA, everything had them number 1 or number 2 all year. So it was rough for those first few days. It was so rough. I had a scheduled series ready for Cover One that I write for, that once the season ended, I was going to do a top 10 most important players list. But the wound was so raw, it didn't feel right to jump into that. And I actually started doing some articles about if the Bills moved on from their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, or if they moved on from defensive coordinator Leslie Frazier, who would be some names to look at, because the vitriol was still fuming for people wanting to see articles like that rather than looking at the rose petals.
Do you feel what happened with Damar Hamlin? Obviously, it was very traumatic and emotional for the team. Do you think that possibly could have drained these guys just how they came out against Cincinnati?
I mean, I was shook. I sat in my living room and just was doom scrolling Twitter, waiting for info on what happened. My living room, I'm in my basement right now, my man cave with all my credentials and nonsense around me. And right above me is our enormous couch in our living room. And I just sat there in silence, not knowing what to do. And I don't even know Damar Hamlin outside of my career. I don't know him. I have no connection to Damar Hamlin. And I went to bed that Monday night assuming I was going to wake up with the news that he was dead. That's where I thought we were. I was the lifeguard on Presque Isle and then at Splash Lagoon, 2 water parks in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I know what happens when you have to do CPR for more than a minute. Your odds aren't good that it's going to be such a positive outcome. So I really thought we went to bed with their buddy, their teammate, their brother, their best friend for some of them, with the info that he was going to be dead the next morning. So I don't know how that doesn't have a psychological impact on you to go back out there and do it again and do it at a high level. Do I think it was all the way into the Bengals game? Can't, we're learning so much about the brain right now. We can't really tell yet, how we can measure, oh, this hurts my bicep, or, oh, my ACL is torn. Until we die, we don't know what this thing up here really does for us. And it's hard to measure those things. And just the anxiety that had to have come with that. And going back to UFC, there's just that drain. There's that buildup and then the lactic drain. And those guys all had to be feeling it.
I'm just glad he's going to be okay. And I've also had to do CPR and use a defib at my other job to save somebody's life a couple times. And it's really stressful and emotional, even if you don't know that person. And these guys, he was their brother, teammate, and I'm glad both teams didn't continue that game, because I was at the game. And sorry, go ahead.
No, they couldn't. There's like, I think the NFL did a good job of spinning it that they weren't going to let them play, but the players weren't going to let them play. Like, there was no way that they were going to continue that game. It wasn't going to happen.
And I was at the game in Buffalo in 2007 when Bills tight end Kevin Everett was he was paralyzed, and they stopped the game for about 45 minutes to an hour, and we all thought he was deceased on the field. Like, nobody was saying anything, and they did continue the game, but it wasn't the same for the fans and especially the players and stuff like that.
Correct. Yep.
That was, September 2007 against Denver. But like I said, the Bills had to deal with a lot of adversity this year with what happened to DeMar, and then with the blizzard forcing one of their games to Buffalo, and the expectations. Do you really, honestly, Greg, being a media member in Buffalo, do you think maybe the expectations were just a little bit too high for this team?
I honestly don't, because one of the first articles I wrote, you mentioned, former Spectrum reporter and anchor, when I left for a better work-life balance and do a lot of my work on the other side of my camera that you can't see. One of the first articles I wrote for Cover One was how I thought you could argue at every level the Bills roster was better. Now, granted, a lot of that was giving them, this player went from year 2 to year 3, so they should be better. Spencer Brown at right tackle should be better. He ended up not being better. The Zach Moss and Devin Singletary running backs should be better in their 3rd and 4th season. They ended up trading Moss away because they clearly didn't think he was better. So I was wrong in some of those predictions, but across the board going into the year, they looked like they had finally figured out the offensive line and some of the signings that they made. Roger Saffold didn't quite work out. Brown at right tackle, like I said, didn't quite work out. The other guard position was basically a revolving door. So it was a rough season, and it's funny to say that because they made it to the divisional round of the playoffs. So it's not like, I'm a Raiders fan. It's not like they were the Raiders who were done by week 7 and lost to Jeff Saturday and the stinking Colts. So the season was still good, but again, going all the way back to the beginning, the expectations were to have their first ever Super Bowl parade, and I think it was fair, but it has to be fair with an asterisk, knowing that, fair is the place you judge pigs. Fair is not always, how it works in football.
There's no guarantees, and nobody saw Von Miller tearing his ACL and being impacted with that loss of Von Miller to that defense.
One more time, how big was that impact? It was enormous. Yeah. Whether you look at the counting stats, as I call them, the box score stats, the sacks, the hits, the QB pressures, the tackle for a loss, all of those things went down. And I'm a big number nerd, so I like the advanced analytic numbers. So the DVOA, which is a Football Outsider stat that takes into everything, counting your schedule and figures out, how you're playing, that dropped precipitously when he went down. Just everything, the pass rush grade. And then it's also what he does with double teams. And you're giving, Gregory Rousseau, his game looked completely different when he was no longer seeing single teams opposite of Von Miller. And he's now the one getting those double teams. And also, Von Miller was one, and then Daquan Jones, the one tackle, D tackle, getting hurt and not playing against the Bengals was another one where you're like, oh, now I know how important these guys were, even though they're not filling up the box score. We see what they were truly doing and absorbing double teams and causing pressure from one side or the other. So yeah, injuries were another thing, that kind of bit them in a wave there towards the second half of the season.
Thoughts on Ed Oliver?
Man, I was so high on Ed Oliver coming out. I'm a huge college football recruiting nerd. And you're talking a can't miss 5-star freak from Houston decided to stay home and go to Houston, a kid that could have went anywhere. Bama, Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame. He could have written his scholarship to anywhere he wanted to go. So when they took him 9th overall, I was actually pretty high on it. I really liked that idea. They've been chasing that D tackle position forever. And the comps coming out to Aaron Donald, of the Rams just weren't fair. No one is him. He's walking into the Hall of Fame the day 5 years after he decides to retire. But I really thought Ed Oliver was going to be that guy. And for whatever reason, he's been good. He's been serviceable, but he just hasn't been that next level guy you take in the top 10 and you hope is, a perennial Pro Bowler making some first and second, team all pro accolades. And it just hasn't quite lived up to that hype yet.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, if you were the general manager of this football club this offseason, what is the biggest area that needs to be improved upon for the 2023 team?
You have agreed to pay Joshua Patrick Allen $250 million over the next decade. You need to protect Joshua Patrick Allen with everything you possibly have. So you need to go out and figure out that offensive line. That needs to be point 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Because giving him a little bit more time, and he's got a little bit more time to do amazing things. And we've seen what he can do when he has that little bit of time. Now, he's fantastic when he has to scramble as well. NFL's Sports Info Solutions site has him at like a 97% success rate when he decides to take off and scramble, which is amazing. You want that. But it'd also be nice to know he doesn't have to do it. And that's where it felt like a lot of this season. So you need to protect him. Figure out whatever that's got to be. I don't care if they use their first, second, and third round picks on a tackle, a guard, and another guard. Just do something to protect that gentleman.
It's like with the Eagles, they built their offensive line, and Jalen Hurts in his 3rd year in the NFL, only his 2nd year as starter. Look at how much he developed as a quarterback, because they built the offensive line for him, and they also added AJ Brown. Now, obviously, the Bills have their version of AJ Brown with Stephon Diggs, but do they have that number 2 guy like Philly does in Devontae Smith?
They don't have Devontae Smith. No, Gabe Davis isn't quite Devontae Smith, but Gabe Davis can be your number 2. For me, what I want, and it depends how you want to do the hierarchy. You want to call it your number 3, you want to call it your number 2. I would like them to have a real slot receiver, a guy that gives them actual separation. None of their guys are big separation players. Whether it's, Stephon Diggs gets open, and he's your number 1 for that reason. But Gabe Davis, it's more of a limited route tree, and you hope he wins a 50-50 ball, and unfortunately, he drops some of them. They thought they might have had it in McKenzie, and you learn that it wasn't McKenzie when they decided to bring Cole Beasley back, who couldn't make it with the Buccaneers. So that showed you kind of where they were, and they might have something in Khalil Shakir, a rookie this year, but he still needs some time to develop. So to me, it'd be more, whether you want to call it their 2, their 3, whatever, however you want to slot it, they need that slot receiver that can truly give them that separation and can take advantage of the cushion that those guys will often get on the line of scrimmage. I'm a Raiders fan, as I mentioned earlier. All my Bills friends want them to somehow trade for Hunter Renfrow. I don't want to give up Hunter Renfrow or anything as a fan, but that's the kind of guy that they need. If a Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee fell to the 2nd round and they were able to get him, that might be a match made in heaven, should it be something that works out in the draft.
And we're going to talk about this as well, not just the draft, but as in the NFL as well, is the salary cap. How do the Bills look for the salary cap going into the 2023 season?
Well, luckily, it's going to go up to the 220-ish million, so that'll help them out. We have a guy on our staff at Cover One. His name's Greg Thompson. He's amazing at figuring out how the cap looks like it's going to break down. So a lot of what I'm about to say, I'm stealing his information. They have 3 or 4 contracts that they can restructure and find money and get themselves to, 40-45 million dollars under the cap. But that's before you pay Tremaine Edmonds. That's before you possibly pay Jordan Poyer. That's before you maybe go out and sign, I don't know, DJ Shark to be that number 2, number 3 receiver. So there's room, but you're not signing another Von Miller this offseason. That's not going to be in the books for the Bills unless they completely mortgage the future and put themselves in a position where the Saints have been the last couple of years, where you go all in and do everything you can to kick the can down the field. But eventually those credit card bills have to be paid.
Quick thoughts on Trey White. Is he still have it, or do you think maybe it's time for the Bills to part ways with White?
Oh no, Trey White, I think he's just fine. I think he'll be just fine. We started to see him, get a little more confidence in his coverage, he's handsy, and you got to find out if the refs are going to call all those little ticky-tack things, but that works out for him. And we have to remember, he blew out his knee completely. So Thanksgiving to Thanksgiving-ish is kind of where we were with 1 year. It took him a couple more weeks than that. Then you have to get yourself back into real football shape, not just I can, sprint a 4.5 shape, not just I can run on a treadmill for an hour shape, but real football shape. I would assume he's going to continue to build off of that in the offseason and come back, next April in spring training, the preseason, everything, and look like the all-pro Trey White he was prior to the injury.
And what were your thoughts on the rookie Elam? What were your thoughts on his play?
Kaiir Elam, I mean, he was in and out. They also did pretty well with Christian Benford later in the draft as a corner, and both of those guys were able to play this year. I think Elam's going to be your CB2 for at least the next 4 years. I like him. I like that they targeted a guy they wanted and then went up and traded up for him in the first round. He's a long, rangy guy that's not afraid to put his nose in there, if you will, and make some plays. So when he gets to truly be the number 2 going into next year, they'll also have Dane Jackson in that mix too with Christian Benford as well. I like him being your number 2 corner. You can do a lot worse in the NFL than having Trey White and Kaiir Elam as your 1 and 2 corners, and then whomever, Micah Hyde coming back healthy at safety, and whether it's Poyer or another guy playing the other safety position, maybe we'll have some miracles, and it's Damar Hamlin, who was having a fantastic season before the injury. But their secondary should still be pretty loaded regardless of what goes on going forward.
Hypothetical question. If they had, let's say, defeated Cincinnati, would Micah Hyde been available for the AFC Championship game?
They said that Micah Hyde may have played for that championship game. We knew he came back on. They did the designation to bring him back, the 21-day designation, so he could practice and get involved. And I honestly, the way he spoke at the presser going into the week against the Bengals, I was kind of cautiously optimistic he might play in that game. That obviously didn't end up being what happened. So I think he could have played in that game. But again, fans will get all fired up and think you're getting the Micah Hyde from mid last season that's good, on an all-pro trajectory. And it would have been a Micah Hyde, having not played for several months and getting back into that football shape. But a guy like that, as much as it pains me because he went to Iowa, a guy like that you'll gladly take in your secondary 10 out of 10 days.
One thing, too, as a Eagles fan, NFL fan, or football fan in general, you can never plan for injuries, and injuries can derail a season. The Eagles had not many injuries this year, but they had Hurts with a shoulder injury, and they had to bring in Minshew, and that was a disaster. And they've been very fortunate. I know Lane Johnson was banged up as well, but if teams can stay relatively healthy, that you need a little bit of luck too to get to the Super Bowl or win it as well, because injuries you just never can predict.
And you brought up Miller and Hyde. If you were making a Bills defensive hierarchy heading into the season, they would have been 2 of the first 3 or 4 names you mentioned. So it wasn't like you and I were out there getting injured. These were guys that really, really had to contribute that they didn't have for most of the season.
What is the time frame on Von Miller? Do you think he will be ready for training camp?
No, I doubt it. Again, it's an ACL. Happened on Thanksgiving, happened on that brutal turf in Detroit, that we know has kind of become synonymous with knee injuries, unfortunately. Could you see him out there, in a specialty jersey, red jersey, non-contact jersey, just maybe doing some stuff on the side? That'd be fantastic. But again, you're probably looking at that same, Thanksgiving to Thanksgiving kind of date, just like we had with Trey White. He's going to be what you're hoping for is you get to whatever week 12, week 13, you're 10-2, you're 9-3, and all of a sudden you just had the greatest in-season acquisition in the history of football, with Miller coming in and wreaking havoc, opposite of Gregory Rousseau and Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver on that line, and you're getting that thrust into your defense as well. That's what you're hoping for, that you're just fine. You don't need them, but damn, does it feel good to have them back.
If you were Brandon Beane and you're the general manager and you had free agents, which guys would you bring back and which guys would you kind of let walk?
It's going to all come down to what they want. You know what I mean? The franchise tag for linebackers for Tremaine Edmonds is over $20 million per season. You can't pay him that. They basically literally can't pay him that. Now, if you go by some of the websites, will say that his market value is 11 or 12. I would sign him to 5 years, $60 million. You play with the incentives, you play with the bonuses, 10 out of 10 days, of the week. Obviously there's only 7, but you get the line there. But I don't think he accepts $11 million a year. So you got to find the happy medium, wherever that might be. Is it 15? Is it 16? And I'd gladly bring him back. I think Jordan Poyer is going to get paid by somebody. The Bears have money. The Pats have money. The Dolphins could use him. I think he's going to price himself out of what the Bills can pay him. And good for him. Go get that money. He was basically given up on in 2017 when he left the Browns and the Bills brought him in. And it was a huge steal by Brandon Beane on what they were able to bring him in for. But I think he's a guy that's going to be able to leverage what he's done the last few years and might price himself out of Buffalo. But those are the two big ones. What's going to happen with those two guys? And then do they do some of the restructures with Deion Dawkins and some of the other guys where they can find some of these cap coupons to have a little bit more money to play with?
Do you still feel that this team can be a Super Bowl contender in 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't, if I'm a fan, I'm once again, again, like it was this year. If they're not in the AFC Championship next year, I'd be frustrated. It really should be that three-headed monster for a few more years of them, the Bengals, and the Chiefs. And it can come down to, I'd feel fine saying if Micah Hyde and Von Miller are healthy and playing in that game, there's no reason they couldn't have beat the Bengals. Now, you mentioned all they've been through. I mean, that team had to, before the season started, go and lay flowers at a Tops, not too far from where they are when a racist, massacred double-digit humans, and they had to deal with that. You mentioned about the Blizzards, moving the Browns game to Detroit, the Damar Hamlin thing. Like, that team had a lot on their plate, not even talking on the field. So I don't see why. And when you have Josh Allen, you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Joe Burrow in the AFC, you ought to be thinking get to that point. And I've seen some odds come out for next year already, and it was Chiefs were number 1 to win the Super Bowl, and the Bills were number 2. Now Vegas has all those beautiful billion-dollar buildings for a reason, but they're telling you that some money's going to come in on the Bills to win it as well.
And the way the NFL set up, I don't, in my opinion is, I don't think you're ever going to see a team like the New England Patriots, one team dominate the NFL for 20 years like the Patriots did, in my opinion.
Well, and also one of the things they had going for them was Tom Brady, go blue, always willing to take less. He never had that insane $40 million cap hit, $50 million cap hit, $60 million with Aaron Rodgers possibly coming in the next couple of years. And that, where they maybe get into some money through his TB12 supplements being allowed to be sold in the stadium. Hey, who am I to say? Wink. But they were always able to get away with that. And it was a huge benefit. And when you have the greatest player of all time, that doesn't hurt too. But again, yeah, it all goes back to the quarterback. Whatever you can get out of the quarterback, and it could be a revolving door. I mean, 3 years ago, we thought Patrick Mahomes was never going to lose another game, and he hasn't won another Super Bowl since the one they won. Could he get another one on Sunday? I hope for you and I both he doesn't.
Same here. Before we get to some other questions, thoughts on Tom Brady. I was actually at his first ever NFL game, July 31st, July 31st, 2000, on a Monday night game. Al Michaels, Dennis Miller at a preseason game between the Niners and Patriots in Canton, Ohio. I ended up having severe food poisoning, but thankfully my friend dragged me to the game even though I was sick. And I got to see Brady play in the second half against the Niners, and I was actually quite impressed with him back then. And of course, being a Michigan fan, I was cheering for him as well.
Well, I always have to get in fights with people who bring up Drew Henson and how, Lloyd Carr wanted to take his job from him and give it to Drew Henson. And I point out his record at Michigan and how he, beat Ohio State and won bowl games and everything he did. So this weird, no, he wasn't even good at Michigan. That's not true. Yes, he was drafted 199th overall. And there's the documentary called The Brady Dozen about the quarterbacks that all went ahead of him. But it wasn't like, he was some schlub off the street that they just happened to be nice and give a helmet to either. And then when you look at it, so many things went right for him early with the good defenses he had and the tuck roll. I'm a Raiders fan, and I love Charles Woodson because of Michigan as well. So much went right for him, but the dude capitalized on every opportunity. And what tasted so good as a Brady apologist oftentimes here in Western New York was that he then goes to Tampa Bay and proves it was him. And it wasn't Belichick necessarily. Not taking anything away from Belichick, but I've joked online several times that in that divorce, Brady got the beach house, Brady got the Ferrari, Brady got the kids, Brady got the 401k, and Belichick got the condo in Reno. It was Brady made out a lot better in that first separation, first coming out of that.
Any chance he changes his mind again and comes back in 2023?
I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, the guy is still playing well. He's still, in my opinion, a top half quarterback in the NFL. I think he could still play. If the 49ers came beating on his door, we have another offseason where Lance, gets hurt and they come knocking on his door, maybe going back to California, pulls at his heartstrings a little more and a chance to get an 8th Super Bowl, pulls him back in. That video, though, that he tweeted out or put on IG or wherever you saw that video, that was raw. Like, those were real human emotions there that he was feeling. So that's going to be hard. But also, I hate when guys retire right after the season because it's really easy to say you're done when you're angry. And so we'll see. But I would lean towards, if you made me bet an amount of money that I cared about, I'd go with no.
Okay, because I really thought the Niners would have been a good option because Jimmy G's not coming back. Trey Lance, who knows what they're going to do with him. And then Brock Purdy obviously damaged his elbow against the Eagles, so he's probably going to be out for, 6 months at least. Who knows?
Yeah, nothing against Brock Purdy, but if you have Tom Brady coming back next year, no offense, Brock, you can learn from Tom for a season.
Some of the Niner fans I know, they were starting to compare him to Brady, and I'm like, listen, guys, he's doing well, but he hasn't done anything yet. And he, unfortunately, what happened with the Eagles, as much as I wanted the Eagles win, I wanted the Eagles to beat them playing Brock the whole game, but that's unfortunately a part of the game as well.
Yep.
Okay. Now, before we get to some questions, final thoughts on Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, and Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey, and how much did this team miss of former offensive coordinator Brian Daboll?
Well, you saw what Daboll did with the Giants. I mean, he was fantastic. He turned Daniel Jones into, Josh Allen light, a little bit less version of Josh Allen. So Brian Daboll obviously was fantastic. And I think the biggest thing that they missed without Daboll, and what I hope Dorsey works on in the offseason, is he did a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of play action, a lot of movements, that stuff. I felt that was lacking at times with the Bills offense this year under Ken Dorsey. And a lot of it was just, Josh, go do something fantastic. And oftentimes he did something fantastic. So I'd like to see Dorsey maybe go back to some of that playbook that we saw with Daboll and utilize some of those things. I don't hate Leslie Frazier as much as some of this fan base did. And again, that's that recency bias. Yes, it looked bad at times against the Bengals. Those first 2 drives, the Bengals went right down the field like they were playing against my daughter's 8-year-old baseball team. They looked that easy for Joe Burrow and company at times. So I'd like to see see McDermott maybe take over a little more. We've always known it's kind of McDermott's defense with Frazier, steering the car. But we'll see what they can do. I have no problem with Sean McDermott. I've been fighting forever that this whole season. It felt like there was people against McDermott. I shouldn't say this whole season. Since the season ended, let me rephrase that. There's been people against McDermott, and I, comparing him to Marty Schottenheimer because he hasn't won the big game yet. And I had to go to the stats and show them that McDermott would have to go 1-12 in his next 13 playoff games to equal where Marty Schottenheimer is. So let's pump the brakes a little bit there. And the people that are mad that the Bills didn't hit on this most recent draft, I was looking it up today and catching flack from people on social media. But over the last 5 drafts, the Chiefs only have 2 guys that have earned Pro Bowls. So let's relax. Let's let these guys play out, see what happens. Yeah, the 3rd round pick for the Bills doesn't look like it was the best. Yes, they took Matt Ariza. I promise you, if they knew everything about Matt Ariza, they would not have drafted Matt Ariza. It's just, let's see what happens. Let's let these guys play out. And again, you made the huge swing in 2018 to go get Josh Allen. And anytime you have that dude, I want to give you a year to still figure it out with that dude.
Thoughts on James Cook? Can he be the number 1 back next year? And any chance Devin Singletary remains with the Bills?
Singletary could be back. It's going to, again, come to a numbers game. The Bills are going to be in a good spot, in my opinion, to steal a really good complementary piece to James Cook. This free agent class of running backs is loaded. Saquon Barkley is getting paid somewhere. Josh Jacobs is getting paid somewhere. There are so many names in this running back class that Singletary might end up getting a great fair market deal for him. Should you wait for that second wave, if you will, of running back free agents to come through. And I really like Cook. They started to really utilize Cook a little bit more in the second half of the season and find him some space with the ball in open field. And that's what you have to do. I mean, go back 2 years ago to the national, or not the national championship, the college football playoff semi, when James Cook just sliced and diced Michigan because they kept getting him the ball in space. And I believe he still has those abilities, and the Bills just have to figure out how to utilize them. And that's another step Dorsey has to take. Cook may have been up for offensive rookie of the year should Dable have still been here, figuring out how to utilize him properly.
And that would take a little pressure off Allen having to do everything, in my opinion. And I'm still old school. I still believe you obviously have to have a passing game, obviously, in this NFL, but I still like the run game too. And the Eagles are lucky with Hurts, Gainwell, who's come on with the Eagles, Sanders, Boston Scott. And to me, it makes your offense better when you're not relying on one player or 2 players like Allen and Diggs all the time.
Yeah, and then we saw it with the 49ers. I mean, Kyle Shanahan, I like to joke about how he's barely over 500, but the truth is, he's really done it without that stud quarterback. Now, it helps when you're not paying a quarterback anything. Then you can pay Christian McCaffrey and Kittle and Ayuk and Debo and have those defensive players, Bosa and all those guys. But you can do it without freaks all over the field or at your quarterback, if you will. But yeah, the Bills with Cook and whomever it might be, Hines is going to be back. But they need to find that thunder, if you will, to lightning.
Hines was a nice addition, and I'd like to see him get more of the ball next year. I didn't think he got the ball that much as a running back, obviously on special teams, but Dorsey did not use him a lot from what I saw.
No, they didn't go into their bag of tricks all that often with any of those players we may have expected them to. The jet sweeps were down this season. Yeah, it was vanilla, I guess might be the best terminology to use. It just seemed, I kept waiting for that trick. They did a lot of Bobby Hart as a left tackle being tackle eligible as a 6th offensive lineman, and I kept waiting for the pass to him or the trick. There just never was that next wave of depth in the playbook that we were all waiting for, and hopefully this offseason he can figure that out.
Do you think Dorsey will be on the hot seat if this team doesn't at least get to the AFC Championship game next year?
If they flame out next year like they did this year, I'm willing to listen on everybody at that point. I'm not right now, but if they're at that same spot next year, I am willing to listen. And when I say everybody, I mean Sean McDermott down. I'm willing to listen at that point.
Definitely. Okay. Are you still good for a few questions?
Whatever you want to do. I'm an open book.
Okay, can you just tell my audience here in Ontario? I'm in a city called Guelph, not far from Buffalo. Just a little bit about yourself and where did you attend school? And did you have a mentor or mentors when you were breaking into the media industry?
I went to a really small school called Teal College in Western Pennsylvania. If you're making the drive down to Pittsburgh from Erie area down to Pittsburgh, it's about halfway through. It's where I met my beautiful wife. I'm actually going to be speaking there on Thursday. I'm the keynote speaker for the graduating class. For some reason, those suckers think I'm important, and I just enjoy talking to those kids. I did an internship in Erie at WJET, WFXP. It's a duopoly, an ABC and Fox station in Erie. And I did an internship there in 2004 and in 2006 and 7. After I graduated, I worked there for my first 2 years in media. That's how it usually happens. Your first contract is 2 years, and then you kind of go to a 3-year and a 4-year, and eventually you get to where you're burnout and you have 2 kids running around, and you decide to parlay that into a freelance career like I currently have now. But coming out of working in Erie, I started working for Spectrum, which at the time was called Time Warner, as a sports reporter and an anchor, and worked that up to being the weekend anchor in Buffalo, and mainly covering the Sabres and college basketball and college football, because that's where my passions were. I love football. I love the Bills. I went most Wednesdays, doing the games and traveling and all that stuff. But it was a fantastic. I always told people, and I still tell people, I had an amazing way to make a mediocre living. And what a very entertaining way to do that. You see all the credentials behind me. I've been very blessed to marry the love of my life. I have 2 kids. My daughter just turned 8. My son's almost 4. And it's just been an amazing ride. And then coming out of COVID, you mentioned you started your podcast with COVID. The basement that I'm in, my man cave, this was a studio. I had 3 big lights, 2 big cameras, and I anchored out of here for 2 years. And then the Blue Jays were down here in Buffalo and covered them. Did the fun COVID test every home game. That was a blast. But when we started getting back to normal, COVID gave me an opportunity to see, how much I loved my kids, how much I was missing my kids. My dad was never there when I was a kid. When my mom divorced him when I was 7, most of our interaction is me reaching out to him. So my kids have an opportunity to be grandkids to him. But I was very blessed to have another man take me under his wing. I got to race dirt bikes and go-karts and sprint cars for him. Growing up, I was one of the poorest kids in school Monday through Friday and one of the richest kids in the world every weekend. So it was a heck of a life. And that's where I am to where I'm sitting here talking to you now. And I do freelance stuff for ESPN. I write for Cover One, and I do production and web hosting for a company called Broadcast Med. They send me all over the country to work for them. So I'm living a pretty darn good life for a kid who once slept in a station wagon.
And I was always into broadcasting and sports when I was younger, but back in the 90s, they didn't have this technology, and I didn't know really what I wanted to do. And my former profession, I think, has prepared me for this. And right now, I'm doing camera work with Rogers TV out of Toronto, big cable company there, and then with the local university here, and I'm getting paid for it. And I'm also doing freelance media work and trying to become a good digital writer, audio operator. I'm trying to learn as much as I can of the media side. Obviously, I want to be on air on radio, but I just love this industry because everybody has been really supportive of what I'm trying to do. I'm 50 years old, and everybody's treated me like one of their own, especially the Buffalo market, especially Pat Malacaro from the
Yes.
Great guy with the Bisons, and they're gonna have me back again this summer to do freelance media work for them. And Pat's been great, and Bud Bailey and Stu Boyer. So I'm very lucky, and I just have to keep grinding away, keep learning, and keep improving.
That's all you
And
can do.
Eric's
That's the key. Just never every day be better the next day than the last.
And Eric Smith of the Raptors gave me good advice a couple years ago. He said, it's okay to write stuff down on a piece of paper, but talk to your guests like you're at a coffee shop or at an arena. Natural conversation makes for a better show.
100%. Could not agree more.
Definitely. And the learning aspect, that's what I love about this. I learn stuff from my guests, their stories, storytelling as well. And people also realize this. You know this well as Greg. The camera operators too. They're a huge part of a TV production as well because they paint the picture for the announcers and stuff like that. And it's truly a team effort when you do a live broadcast.
The stories I've been lucky enough to be nominated and to win awards for. When you're an MMJ, multimedia journalist, you do a lot of your own camera work, especially when I would cover high school or college athletics. I'd be my own photog. And the stories I won awards for, or nominated awards for, were the ones that had the best videography and the best interviews. It wasn't, yes, I can interweave those in my sentence and my, knowledge of the English language, but the video, people see that, that's really what can touch the audience is when one of them I did about a high school basketball player that I learned he had 2 club foot. You don't have club feet. You're born with a club foot in both feet. And, when dad cries and gets emotional and you have the pictures of them breaking his ankles, and that's where you go to the next level above just someone who can write really well.
And that's one thing I'm learning to do as well. By the way, live interviews too. I ended up doing some last year as well, and it's one thing to do a podcast. You can prepare for it and write stuff down, but when you're doing a live interview, you got to think on your feet a little more, and that's what I'm doing as well. And it's just been a great opportunity for me as well.
And don't be afraid to change up what you thought you were going into. I did a story that ended up doing well on a kid from UB, actually a kid from Canada, Dominic Johnson, a quarterback and a basketball player from Canada, went to UB. And halfway through the story, I learned he grew up homeless. And I said, Dominic, we're going to stop. And if you're okay, we're starting over. The story is now how you've overcome being homeless and having to walk your brothers through some seedy part of town to get to school when you were a kid, as opposed to Dominic, the quarterback. So, you need to be willing, any job, be willing to and able to think on your feet like that.
And one word I wanted to use with you too, Greg, and especially in this industry, is be flexible. And I try to be flexible with my TV work, camera work, and with my guests as well. And the guests really appreciate it when you can make time for them, because sometimes things happen with guests' schedule, and the show has to go on. And if you're not flexible to be in media, then maybe this isn't the industry for you.
You are 100% correct. And my flexibility went down when I had 2 children. So I absolutely know what you mean.
Definitely. Now, you brought up Spectrum News. What overall thoughts on your time with Spectrum News? And were there some people there that kind of gave you a little bit of a hand in your career there as well?
I was very blessed with what they did. Being a 24-hour station, I had the freedom to do a lot of what I wanted to. These stories that we're talking about, I had the opportunity to I wasn't limited where if you're at in Buffalo 2, 4, and 7, the affiliate stations, you go and do a package, a story, and you get 90 seconds. You're lucky if you get a minute 45. I was very fortunate to be told you can have 3 or 4 minutes. You could do two-part stories that are each 3 minutes if it's worthy of it. So I was very fortunate and lucky in that regard to have a news director in Kelly Holland and a sports director in Tom Carroll who trusted me and knew I'd do good work and just said, go, just, we know you, you're going to own it, go do it. So that I was very, very lucky in that. And I've known Kelly, my goodness, I think I've known Kelly more in my life than I haven't. And I'm only 39. If that tells you how long we've been friends. So I've been very, very blessed there. And I had, going back to earlier, I didn't mention my mentor, Scott Wildigas, who I did my internship under in Erie. And he ultimately hired me coming out of college. So I'd be remiss if I didn't bring his name up because he's someone. And then Kim Young was my professor that got me that internship. So those 2 people, Kim and Scott, I tell them all the time, they hate when I bring it up, but I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now had they not done what they did for me. Oh my goodness, almost 20 years ago.
And one of the former Blue Jays announcers, Jerry Howarth, did the Jay games for 36 years. He's sort of been an online mentor to me as well. And he's just such a great guy. And you meet a lot of these guys and they're really talented, but then you get to meet them and get to know them as people. And they're just as good as human beings as they are professionals.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Most of the people in this industry are fantastic. There are some that, I wouldn't mind if they took a long walk off a short bridge, but most of them, 95% are amazing humans.
Yeah, especially John Murphy too. John came on Murph came on my show a couple years ago when I wasn't very good. I was starting out, and he gave me 45 minutes of his time, and he opened up about Ernie Harwell and the Detroit Tigers. And I really hope Murph recovers, gets 100%,
Yes,
because I know he had the
absolutely.
stroke. But he's one of my favorite guests on here, and I've been very lucky to have people on like John Murphy, and he's a real professional.
Yep, one of those guys that when I was, still wet behind the ears and just a little punk kid in the Buffalo Bills media room or the Sabres media room, treated me like I was an equal. So those are the people you always look up to. And now I'm that old guy now. Not quite as old as Murph, but now I'm the old guy trying to give back some of that same energy, same love, and same knowledge.
Absolutely. And if I'm lucky enough to make it in the radio industry, I'm going to pay it forward as well, because I've had people giving me some help along the way as well. Hey, before we wrap this up, you mentioned the Erie Otters. What
Hmm.
role did you have with the Erie Otters, and what did you think of the Ontario Hockey League?
I covered them just in Erie, just like you would cover the Sabres here, or a media guy in Toronto would cover the Maple Leafs. It was I was an intern. Ryan O'Reilly was the first overall pick as a 16-year-old coming out of, I'm not sure where he's from, in Canada somewhere. I know he drove his truck unfortunately into a Tim Hortons there several years back. But I loved covering the Otters, because in Erie you treat the Otters like big time, because they are just like the Erie Seawolves. They're a minor league baseball team. You treat them as big time, and they, in those situations, they want you there as bad as you want to be there, because they want the publicity. The Bills and Sabres don't need the publicity from me, but when you're in Erie, it's better. It's more fun like that. And they were always so good when I was there. It seemed I was very lucky. Tim Conley came through, and I ended up playing for the Sabres when I was there. My mom's cousin is pretty well off, pretty high up in UPS, and he's a single man. He's a billet. So we had Connor McDavid, was one of his billet kids. So the Otters have been good to me, and they were a lot of fun. And those kids are scratching and clawing, unless you're the McDavids, unless you're the Ryan O'Reillys. A lot of those guys know that's their opportunity to even if you get to the ECHL, even if you get
American Hockey League. Yeah.
Yeah, a scholarship to Fredonia State University. It might not be all of those guys aren't going to the NHL. All of those guys aren't going to be the first overall pick, just like kids in the WHL. Some of those guys that's their one time to shine, and I love when you see that come together, and then you have guys like Ryan O'Reilly or Connor McDavid. It's a fun time, and then you're also packed into such a little barn there. It's gone through so many name changes. I don't know what they call
Erie Insurance Arena.
Is
now.
that what it is now?
Yeah,
I'm surprised UPMC doesn't own it at this point. They bought every other naming right, but yeah, and it's such a little barn and so cozy and a dumpster all at the same time.
And they've celebrated 25 years there. They have their own beer there now, Otter Beer. And I was going to ask you this as well. Obviously, the OHL has 3 American teams: Saginaw, Flint in Michigan, and Erie. Would the Buffalo area support an Ontario Hockey League team?
It bugs me how little attendance the Sabres are getting right now. So I'm not sure if it would work well. Also, if you weren't playing at KeyBank Center, I don't know where you'd play that there's enough seats.
They'd need about 4,500, 5,000 seats.
Yeah. So when you have the Bandits and the Sabres both chewing up home dates, it might be a struggle to find a proper place for them to be. Buffalo loves its hockey, don't get me wrong. But even the next venue down would be like Harbor Center, where the Sabres practice often, where Canisius College plays. But that you're only talking a few hundred people. So that would be your first big hurdle would be, where are they going to play? Can they find the nights at KeyBank to be fully invested in a season? So you'd have to get through that first, and then we'd have to see from there.
On the thing too, Erie's only about an hour from Buffalo,
Right.
So if you really love the OHL, it's worth the drive to Erie as well. Before we wrap this up, Greg, quickly, I got to ask you about this. What are your thoughts on Super Bowl 57 between the Chiefs and the Eagles, and who do you see winning, and who do you see being the Super Bowl MVP for either the Eagles or the Chiefs?
Well, I told you before we started that I've known Nick Sirianni since he was a wide receiver coach for the Chargers. That's how far back he goes. His older brother coaches a high school football team not too far from where I currently coached. Let me say coached a high school football team not too far from where I sit. Won a couple of state titles not too far from where I sit. I can't go to the grocery store or the gym without driving past the house he grew up in where his parents still currently live. So I'm a little biased when it comes to that one. I'd love to see Nick get a Super Bowl. I'd love to see Fran, his dad, at Wegmans, wearing his Eagles Super Bowl championship sweater or hoodie or hat or whatever. But all that aside, it's hard to go against Patrick Mahomes. But we saw what happened against Tampa Bay. When you have all the right pieces in place, you can slow down Mahomes and that offense. And I can see the Eagles doing that. I can see that defense, Brandon Graham, another Michigan guy, all their pieces, Gardner Johnson out of corner. I could see them doing some damage and holding. You're not going to stop Mahomes, but slowing him down enough to let all the pieces we've talked about on offense, from Hurts, all the running backs you mentioned, Brown, Smith, Goddard, and that fantastic offensive line. If you want to donate some of those O linemen to the Bills, they'll gladly take them. I think you're going to be talking about an Eagles championship, and I'm not sure you're going to need a Philly special to pull this one off. And as far as MVP, I mean, let's be honest, that's the best quarterback award, whether it's regular season or playoffs. So if the Eagles are going to do it, you're probably going to need, 275, 300, 3 and another 50 rushing yards and maybe a rushing touchdown from Hurts. And if he comes anywhere close to that, he's not only going to hoist the Lombardi, but he'll have the MVP trophy as well.
I would be okay with that as well. But my dark horse for MVP for the Eagles, if they win, would be Hassan Reddick. I think he's one of the best free agent signings this year by Howie Roseman from the Arizona Cardinals. Everyone talks about Nick Bosa, who's great, but Reddick, to me, has made that Eagles defense into a championship quality defense, because when he gets double teamed, that opens it up for Cox, Graham, etc., Josh Sweat, and I just think Reddick is going to be my pick for Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, there's a kid, from Temple, not the biggest school in the world. I actually think I saw him play against UB in college, and he flashed then. That's why he was a first round pick. And the Cardinals just could never untap, whatever potentially had inside, and your Eagles certainly have done so.
Definitely, and I'm looking forward to this game. I think it's going to come down to the O-line and the D-lines. And if the Eagles' offensive line and D-line play the way they're capable of, and they don't turn the ball over, I think turnovers, especially in a Super Bowl, are huge. If they can play a clean game and their O and D-line can dominate the game, I think the Eagles could win their second Super Bowl in 5 years.
Yeah, share some with the rest of us.
Well, you guys will get yours next year. I just want the Eagles to get their second Super Bowl, and then I'll be pulling for Buffalo. But I really think the Bills can do their blueprint off the Eagles by if they can address their offensive line as well, because I do think they have a good running game, and Josh Allen has all the skills to be a championship quarterback.
I don't disagree. We'll see. We'll see.
Definitely. And last question before we wrap this up, Greg, and I really want to say thank you again
for
coming
anytime.
on. I appreciate it, really. Next time, maybe we'll talk a little more about the Sabres, because I think that's another team in Buffalo that's on the rise, the Sabres as well.
I covered every draft pick from 2012 till COVID. In person. So I got a lot of Sabre stories.
Okay, definitely. We'll save that for the next time. But where can my audience here in Ontario follow you on social media? And if you have a website, and any quick advice for those looking to pursue a career in the media industry, not just myself, but who are watching or listening to this show later.
At Greg Vorse. It's my name, GregVorse. That's horse, but with a V. And I work for Cover One, at Cover One, COVER, the number 1. That's who I write for the most. But you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. They're all just search my name. It's in there. Twitter is where I am the most. I even after taking a little bit of a step back from the media industry to spend more time with my wife and children, I'm still on Twitter more than I'd like to admit. I've stopped checking the screen time because it's too much. Advice I'd give, I'm actually, like I said, I'm going to speak Thursday to the graduating class of Teal, and having that passion, loving what you're doing, that's the big one. If you're looking to get your foot in the door, it's Instagram, or not Instagram, sorry, LinkedIn. Get on LinkedIn, do those. That's where you found me.
Yes.
Do that. Get on there, look there, and shoot your shot. Don't be afraid to send that email, make that phone call, send that tweet, hit that DM. You just never know. My DMs are open. I've never turned down a DM unless it's someone trying to sell me an NFT, those weird monkey cartoon
Yes.
things that are always popping into my DMs. But don't be afraid to ask that question, or try to get that interview, or whatever it might be. Because if you don't ask, you've already become your own no. So if you don't ask the question, the answer is already no. You've decided the answer is no. I had to shoot my shot with my wife, who's a 10 out of 10, and I'm like a 4.5. So I tell people together, we're both sevens. It's perfect. But you just have to, be willing to step out there. And as you mentioned earlier, with technology these days, you don't have to work for a TV station or a radio station to start honing your voice, start finding your niche, start finding yourself and where you're comfortable, and see if you like it. Podcasts are pretty darn easy if you have a cell phone to start up and start doing, and find your niche and run with it. And if it doesn't turn out to be something you like, well, hey, you spent $0.00 because you already have the cell phone. And if you do love it and you can turn it into something, well, that's freaking fantastic.
And I was able to get a local GM sponsored
There you
dealership
go.
for my podcast as well, and I'm working on more. And one thing I agree with.
And
what
let
you
me
just-
let me say that
Sorry.
to you too. Is don't
Okay.
When I say shoot your shot and be willing, I don't know how that sponsorship came about, but again, if you're looking to get a couple extra bucks, or maybe you want some cold brews to crack open when you're done, call that local brewery. What's the worst they're going to do? Say no? Call
And
that
we,
car.
yeah, and we have a local brewery here called Sleeman's Brewery. I don't know if you've ever had Sleeman's
Well,
beer, but
next time we do this, I want to hear brought to you by Sleeman's, and I need a 6-pack sent to my house.
I'm actually going to work on that as well. And the big thing too is you got to reach out. If you're passionate about this, you have to reach out. And 95% of the media people have told me yes. I've had a few no's, but you don't take it personally. I use it as motivation to I want to show these people they made a mistake, and just to continue to improve, keep learning, and just like I said, this is something I have a passion for.
And that's you're already halfway there when you have a passion for it. I mean, I made $9.80 an hour on that contract in Erie, Pennsylvania. I was not living the high life. That's not a beer ad. I was not living the high life. And then it finally, when got to be, at the end of my time before I left Spectrum, the paychecks were pretty solid.
Yeah. And like I said, money's nice, but for me, this is something I really enjoy. This to me is not work. And I just love storytelling, either doing camera work or doing my podcast. And Greg, I was going to say again, thank you so much for coming on season 5, episode 24. This is my 244th episode tonight. And I've been very lucky to have so many great guests like yourself on. And podcasts are only as good as your guests. I'm just a host.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Greg, and I hope you have a great night. And we'll definitely keep in touch with you on Twitter and on LinkedIn as well.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks again, Greg. And give me about 20 minutes or so, and I'll have this audio version downloaded, and I'll send you a copy of it as well.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Have a great night. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed season 5 of episode 24 of Live with CDP Sports Talk with Greg Vorse, media member, freelance media member in the Buffalo, New York area. He also worked with Spectrum News as well, and he covered the Buffalo Bills and the Buffalo Sabres as well. So thank you again to Greg for coming on Live with CDP Sports Talk as well. Speaking of that, my next Live with CDP Sports Talk, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet, will be Wednesday, February 8th at 5 p.m. Eastern with Adam Levi. He's a digital writer for the National Lacrosse League and also a beat writer for the Vancouver Warriors and the Colorado Mammoths, who are the defending National Lacrosse League champions in 2022 as well. Before we wrap this up, guys, also want to let you know Super Bowl 57 will play will take place at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Fox from State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, between the AFC champion Kansas City Chiefs and the NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles. Go Birds, fly Eagles, fly! And I'm predicting the Eagles will win Super Bowl 57 in that game as well. I will give you guys my prediction and my MVP pick for after Wednesday's podcast show with Adam Levi, again for the National Lacrosse League as well. All right, guys. And also, Live with CDP Sports Talk is live streamed on 5 platforms on my YouTube channel, Facebook Live, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. Thank you, everybody, for watching this live stream of Live with CDP Sports Talk on these platforms as well. You guys can also check me out on beacons.ai/Chris D. Palme. That's beacons.ai/Chris D. Palme. All my social media sites and my digital content is on that site as well. As always, Live with CDP Sports Talk, again, is sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership, 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210, or email them at info@barrycullen.com and tell them that Chris Palme, or AKA CDP, sent you as well. And I'm also, guys, loving my 2023 Chevy Trailblazer RS. Again, I purchased that Barry Cullen Chevrolet, and thank you to Nathan Laud. He's one of the best sales people there as well, if you're interested in a GM product as well. You can also follow me on TikTok at Live with CDP. That's at Live with CDP on TikTok. I also do a lot of content there as well. StreamYard is the official live stream provider of Live with CDP Sports Talk podcast. If you're into webinars or podcasting, please go to StreamYard. They make your podcast or webinars look very professional and organized. Great customer service at StreamYard as well. As always, Live with CDP Sports Talk podcast, the audio version is downloaded to iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Castbox, LinkedIn, Stitcher, and Tuned In. And I want to say thank you to my audio listeners. I now have 24 countries across the world listening to Live with CDP Sports Talk, and now including the Netherlands and Poland. And I want to say thank you so much to my audio listeners as well. I really appreciate that as well. And also, guys, any comments or questions about my podcast, you can email me at cpalme19@gmail.com. cpalme19@gmail.com. You guys can also follow me on LinkedIn, Chris Palme. I post a lot of content on my LinkedIn page as well. And also, guys, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And also, please consider subscribing and liking my YouTube channel, Chris Palme, or Live with CDP Sports Talk on my YouTube channel as well. And if you guys can give me about 15-20 minutes, I will have both of tonight's episodes downloaded to my audio platforms as well. Again, thank you to my guest, Greg Vorse, a freelance media member from Buffalo, New York area, for coming on tonight. And thank you to Greg for talking about his career, and also with Spectrum News, and also about the 2022 Buffalo Bills, and also about some Erie Otters as well, and stuff like that. And Greg is also a Michigan Wolverine fan, so go blue. And again, I'm going to try to have Greg on again in the future, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Buffalo Sabres and how that franchise is finally going in the right direction. But again, guys, I hope you guys can tune in to season 5, episode 25, this Wednesday night, February 8th, with Adam Levi, again, a digital writer for the National Lacrosse League and a beat writer for the Vancouver Warriors and the NLL champion Colorado Mammoths. So please tune in to season 5, episode 25. So that's about it for tonight's shows, guys. Again, I want to say thank you to Isaac Carmichael and Greg Voss for coming on live with CDP Sports Talk. Again, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet here at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Gulf Auto Mall. I hope everybody has enjoyed both of the podcast shows tonight, and I will download them to my audio platform shortly. I hope everybody has a great night, and we'll see you guys Wednesday night. This Wednesday night at 5 o'clock with Adam Levi, digital content writer for the National Lacrosse League. Have a great evening, everybody, and thanks for watching and listening to Live with CDP Sports Talk.
Live with CDP, a weekly